Great. So hello and welcome to both our virtual and in-person visitors that are here in Fox Commons. Thank you for coming out today and supporting this program. My name is Leah Thomasy, and I am the Education and Public Engagement Coordinator for the Galleries at Moore. And we are just so excited to have Charlyn Magdaline Griffith Oro joining us from their studio today for today's lunchtime lecture. So I'm just going to briefly introduce Charlyn. Charlyn's work opens up pathways of communication between the dead and the living. They are a researcher and artist activist who creates performance, objects, and imagery as rituals for strengthening the potency of Black and Indigenous memory and imagination. Trained as a sociologist and ecologist with a long career in social justice work, their abolitionist framework and specialization in community health and art education informs their practice. They currently participate in the Chronicling Resistance Project as an activist curator fellow, digging into the collections of the Philadelphia area Special Collections Libraries and Free Library of Pennsylvania. Charlyn's current work, which they'll share a bit about with us today, is a literal and performative series of sculptures, creating an accounting system for the many names, images, and stories that emerge as they engage with history. They produce new artifacts which unpack the layered meanings of various tools and seemingly mundane everyday objects through their use of cowrie shells as embellishments. Through these works, they also bring voice to those who have been left out of historical accounts. These contemporary heirlooms stand in place for the many objects stolen from African and Indigenous cultures that are now held by cultural institutions like museums, archives, and libraries. And with that, I will turn it over to Charlyn to get us started.
Thank you, Leah. Good afternoon, everyone. I was just saying that it has actually been over a year since I've done any public talks. And so I'm really excited. And this week happens to be a fairly busy one for me, starting with joining you all today. Leah and I spoke like a month or two ago about this moment. And, you know, I asked, like, what is it that you really want me to focus on? There's so much in my work. There's so many directions that my work flows to and through. And she said, you know, if you could focus on the ways that you utilize the archive to make your work, that would be interesting, and I think resonate well with our student and staff. And so what I want to share today is a little bit about sort of the last 2 years plus, some of which includes my time in this fellowship, Chronicling Resistance, that's been deeply rooted in accessing various archives throughout the Philadelphia region. And, you know, that sort of access being made possible through Pascal, the Philadelphia area Special Collections Libraries, that, you know, sort of union of libraries and archives and universities. And then obviously through funding through the Free Library, and we're funded by Pew and Mellon. That's a plug. That's a thank you. Obviously, I was a researcher before entering the fellowship, and that was what drew me to it, to the work, and that's what, you know, interested the folks that brought me on in me joining. And I think that when I started, I kind of had my mind set on having a few different avenues by which I would produce work, insights, take notes. I'm a very much best practices type of person, or sort of generate tips and tricks as I go type of person. And so I'm going to share my screen and just kind of talk with you all through, let's see. Can you all see this nice and large? Awesome. This was one of the first insights that I had. We were doing a lot of conversation around important first sites of research. And one of the things that kept sort of getting butted up against, or there felt like there was some kind of debate about, was the idea that first sites of research or primary sources were the ones that were held inside of the institution, ones that were, cataloged, that we had call numbers for, that somebody had bought and sold and traded and collected. And the reality for me that set in was that for me, the most important first sites of research are the soul, the spirit, the mind, the body. And that these are also more than adequate primary sources for information. And this comes deeply from my time in organizing work and community health work. I'm a full spectrum doula. I've also been working in sort of crisis response for many, many years as it related to various forms of abuse and trauma, and how we can, support our communities as we're in the work in addressing when trauma comes up. And so being so deeply connected on a soul level, on a spirit level, through the mind and an awareness of the body, as a socially engaged artist, it felt very wrong for it not to be said that what we walk with, the catalog sort of that we walk with, the collection of experiences that we remember, our reference points, must be acknowledged. And it doesn't have to be acknowledged by the institution, because, what the people do and what we say is important. Over time, it does impact culture. And so what I'm interested in is the way that we recontextualize what it means to do research. Asking a friend why is research. Asking yourself why is research. And so then I wrote this short poem, and some of what I'm adding to these posts are going to be like directly copied from my Instagram, because I do use my Instagram as a journal, and it is the place where I do feel strongly about what I write there. It's as important as anywhere else that I'm writing. So the poem reads: both the researcher and the archive web of internets, your conversations, meditations, and memories are essential to the accuracy of historical accounts. You are a better source of information than you might allow yourself to be. So I had this, this idea that, I was speaking with these to, folks like yourselves, to, younger people even that are thinking about research. I don't know who will stumble upon these things, but, hoping that it reminds people that you are the most precious archive. The next one kind of came from some of the buildup of not so much backlash, but like definitely tensions that were arising among, different folks that are involved in the community work that I'm doing the fellowship, the research, and it made me think about, because I was being told sort of, are you really upset? Like, is what you're finding so upsetting? Are the environments that you've worked in, is there really harm being done there? Are you really in pain? Are you sure it's not this? And I was really deeply impacted by the way that I was remembering, because mind you, this is all happening in COVID as well. And so, we all kind of experienced a little bit of some shift. Some of us more than others. Some of us were taken away completely from, community practice. And so the small ways that I was still in practice with folks, I was really shocked that people would dare to question whether or not something actually hurt to behold in the archive or in the in my engagement with the institutions. And so I wrote, when you find yourself judging the people around you for feeling the intensity of their emotions, do not attempt to edit them to suit your understanding. Become an accomplice to the inquiry, their plan, the work that they're doing with that energetic mass. My greatest joy resides right next to the sometimes strenuous lifting up of the people that I engage in this work with. We feel through, knowing that the strategy, peace, dreams, freedom is on the other side. We hold each other's hands and assure each other that though the path be dark and long, we are not alone. I included a pretty popular quote: weeping may last for the night, but a shout of joy comes in the morning. Psalm 30, verse 5. And, what I extracted was intentionally investigate anger, grief, and fear. Joy is likely nearby. And in the research, there will be grief. There will be grief, especially as a Black, Indigenous person, as I'm looking for sort of evidence of the life of my ancestors and evidence of why, the answer to my whys, just realizing that, yeah, there's sadness. And it's also really difficult to work with institutions. It's difficult to work with people who have institutional power. And there needs to be space, even if it's not made in the institution, at least among us who are the seekers, and those that are resisting sort of the institutionalized violence that we witness often and almost every day, that we have sort of accomplices in that. The rest of the post read over the last few years, but particularly the last 9 months, urban archivists, their name is Andrea Walls, and I have become co-conspirators. That might be my favorite form of relationship because it requires trust, openness, defining and redefining terms and the terms of engagement. This is a beautiful growth season for the seeds we've sowed. Though we watered some of the plants with tears, where we held hands and reminded each other, you have a right to be mad. And that's a quote from a Solange Knowles song. Andrea's heart and mind, which speak through her work, is incredible. Her Museum of Black Joy, which is also now on Instagram. So please follow Urban Archivists and follow Museum of Black Joy, is a rich and beautiful archive of additive design and new language explorations. The excitement we feel about each other's work is the happiness that she's finding all throughout history. And our research continues to show us how it sits right next to the emotions that people are constantly trying to suppress in our experiences. Fuck that. We're here. Yeah, I'm gonna, be shouting folks out as it goes. So please do have your phone out to follow, or have Instagram open to follow. This next one actually came to me, because of COVID, our ability to access the archive was spotty. During the pandemic, I was also traveling back and forth, driving to California, and did that trip about 10 times. This came to me during one of my trips to the archive. I want to say that I was at Haverford College and was taking in volumes and volumes of work about the same person, about Toussaint. And, many people know about the Haitian Revolution. I'm also going to shout out some books while we're here together. Many people know about the Haitian Revolution, but I didn't even know, I'm Caribbean born. I did not even know the extent to which people wrote about Toussaint. Look, I had no idea. One of the other archives that I definitely visited was the Blogson Collection up at Temple University. And it is an all Black archive that, this collector, Charles L. Blogson, an amazing mind. Another piece that I was able to gather from the Blogson was the Haitian Revolution reader that he put together along with the African American Museum of Philadelphia, and with some support from the Smithsonian Institute. And I mean, when I tell you, I want to show you an image of Toussaint, of which, this is perfect, actually. This is a statue of Blogson. This is a statue of Toussaint with Blogson. When I was at Haverford, I was realizing volumes, novels, books, so many different names. The Black Napoleon being one. This is an original print of this book by this guy, Percy Waxman, for whom I cannot find any other information. And I've tried, the librarians tried. There were other books, Toussaint was called the Black Napoleon. There were other names that he was called that, again, kind of played into some of the tropes that we've heard about Black male virility and kind of this buck archetype. People were really obsessed with him. And I realized that along with having read The Black Jacobins by C.L.R. James, that's another title drop, how important it was going to be for me to find accounts from Black people, because so much of what I was finding were white writers, white male writers, that were more obsessed, again, with the archetype of the Black buck and virility and the beastliness of a man, of a Black man, than and where they make note of Toussaint's brilliance and intellectual genius, we find that he's being compared to white men, right? So what I was reading, what I was realizing as I was reading, and this is, I've got like 20 different books going at once, is just how what is considered history is not static. It's a sketch that's being drawn forever, and it is a caricature of events. We cannot be sure how anything has happened. And in fact, what we do well to do, and I definitely, this scholar, Dr. Dana Ramey Berry, talks about the way that we behold history and read history, it being so important to resist taking on the sort of notions of that time, to come to the reading with our own critical tools for assessing what we're reading. And so, yeah, history is a caricature of events. Your stories bring details to the narrative. And so I think that, over the last 20 years, there's been like this push in the nonprofit world around storytelling, around oral history projects and things like that. And those are literally the practices, the traditions that, at least for me in my communities, that persist, and that are the tools and the tales that help us to resist, that help us to like be in disbelief. I think a lot of times people are instructed to suspend your disbelief. And it's like, actually, no, for this journey back into time, we actually really do need to come with a sense of skepticism. And it's okay to come with that. Next to this meme is my Instagram caption, which I had tied this to my previous readership at the Huntington Library. I was a reader there for a couple of years in Octavia Butler's, this Black science fiction writer, Octavia Butler's archives. And I just reference her here because Mama Octavia's left us instructions to write every day. I'm dropping this here for your consideration. Becoming a fellow in the Philadelphia Area Consortium of Special Collections Libraries has made it abundantly clear that history is an articulation of what happened, what people thought happened, the distillation of the retellings, and the shit is inflated, it's conflated, and oftentimes it's constipated. And all history is storytelling, period, including legal documents and the Bible. And I note that because some of the most helpful documents for those of us that are trying to piece history together to find more stories, to find the stories of people who are not the narrators that we find, whose voices we find in the archives, but maybe they are the footnote of those stories, or maybe they are mentioned in passing, or, sort of most horrifically are mentioned as property. That legal documents often help to really illuminate their stories. For example, ship manifests, and I can shout out the city archives right here on Spring Garden, and I believe 7th here in Philadelphia, that is also open to the public by appointment. And I just, remind us all, why be scared to tell your story? There's nothing to fear. Publish, share, keep secret, with cool trails of clues that will lead to your bio, a spiritual progeny back to you. It's all good. It's all valid. And most importantly, it's so necessary. Just like us, there will be generations sophisticated and curious, and they will see all that has remained and know that they belong here. Each of our biological and spiritual children and siblings will be inspired, whether by grace or anger, to survive, thrive, and live on in memory. Please tell us more. I promise so many more of us want to know. And finally, my last meme in this series that I posted just not too long ago is that research is a recipe. And what's been interesting is that I started the fellowship. I was already deep in an inquiry around food and looking at some of the food traditions in the region. I'm a farmer also. I've been doing land justice, sort of ecological justice work, agroecological justice work for the last 10 plus years. And, seed work and plant work is also really significant to, when we talk about food and archives. Seeds are their very own archives. And And so I mentioned here that, I'll talk much more about my experience in the Chronicling Resistance Fellowship at another time. But, starting the process in that fellowship, having done my own research already and having my own art practice was really essential. And so, if I was to give advice to anyone, wanting to get into whether school related or, accessory type of fellowships, to, come to it knowing that the most valuable thing that you bring is not the work that you'll produce with them necessarily, but the fact that you've been producing work that drew them to you already. And that the way that your research is going to come to you it's not going to be linear. It's going to be much like the stirring of a pot, that spiral or the concentric circles that are turned, and that, as it relates to institutions, sort of the linear approach to business and oftentimes, looking at history, particularly for people who are connected to sort of more spiritual tradition, that you're going to have to continuously reclaim your recipe, to continue to hold and keep your recipe, to not let folks tell you that there's something wrong with your recipe, because it's, again, going back to the first post, you are the first archive, and you're the most important as you're researching. What you feel intuitively is important. So yeah, I just mentioned here that, I had started the fellowship, sort of continuing research for my project, the Free Brunch Program. Go follow the Free Brunch Program on IG. And looking at, food lineages, public health, and domestic work. But it is literally what shifted me to inquiring about the Caribbean's influence on Philadelphia and coming back to my own, my own identity. And so, again, in that, what got cooked up by my own recipe, sort of, I served up myself. And yeah, those are the memes that I have. And then today I wanted to kind of dive into some storytelling about a very specific piece that I made over the last couple of years that's been a part of this new sort of sculptural work that I've been making. And so I want to reference one other scholar's work whose work has been very important to me, and this person's practice of collaboration has also been really significant. And just want to do that. But first, I want to make a mention of a couple of ancestors who are new ancestors of mine, who are also creative influences and who were also archives where my research for many of my inquiries often started. First being Gary Smalls, who became an ancestor on January 4th of this year. Call him Uncle Gary. And he's a darling to so many of us here in Philadelphia. A researcher, an architect, a visual artist, I would also call him a performance artist in the manner in which he shared all of his wisdom, deeply connected to spirit. And the transmissions that Uncle Gary gave me has also deeply influenced my work over the last year and a half, in particular. Natanya Davine Stewart, affectionately known as Dav among our friends and creators, made Ancestor on May 4th, 2020. And was one of the first people that I worked with when I moved here to Philadelphia from New York back in 2008. And with Davine and another artist who is still with us, who's very prolific, Misty Soul, Davine, myself, Misty, and a number of other people really made school of, researching and making work, researching, asking questions, experimenting. Dav really also taught me how to communicate with ancestors that weren't my family. And I'm really appreciative of that. My mother made Ancestor last year in February, and that's me there, cute baby. And my mom is definitely the reason why I'm an artist today. She's definitely the reason why I, kind of bucket these institutions' desires to keep folks, kind of in a lane. And, she lives in all of my work. And finally, Denise Valentine, Story Mama, made Ancestor March 23rd, 2020, and taught me how to move energy around as you were researching, where to put your research, how to turn it into kinetic energy, and how to not be afraid to look at some of the uglier parts of history. So, I just want to take a moment to breathe life into their memories and thank them. And next, and I think I have to refresh my screen. Yes. Next, I want to talk about something that was in the news that you all might have heard about, which is UPenn's Morton Collection, where a large amount of skulls that were gathered by so-called Dr. Samuel George Morton were and are kept. And this person at the center, Abdul Ali Muhammad, is a dear friend of mine and creative collaborator. And I've kind of just put, pieces in it, and it looks stacked and overwhelming because this person was reporting back in April of last year nonstop about the anthropological racism that we were seeing, the medical racism that we were seeing in this Morton collection, in an institution that actually, and I referenced this person, Dr. Dana Ramey Berry, earlier, because I spent the winter reading this book, The Value of the Enslaved. The price for their pound of flesh, the value of the enslaved, from womb to grave in the building of a nation. I was reading this the winter before Abdul Ali brought this story back out. They had sparked a petition years before talking about the collections and how racist the keeping of human remains that were dug up were. Reading this book really contextualized for me how Philadelphia was so pivotal, so central to the medical practice in the United States, having the first medical school here, and highlighted the cadaver trade, which was a mechanism by which, people of both African and Native American ancestry were traded even after death. So folks who were kidnappers and enslavers were figuring out this whole new economy after their human property, so-called, these enslaved people passed. They were not allowed to rest. They were traded, and a whole trade was sparked, so much so that legislation had to be passed to stop the cadaver trade. And in particular, this story rose up in the spring. And this is where sort of spiritual practice and a lot of what I've mentioned earlier comes into play, which is that Spirit guided me to read this book. I stuck with it. It was very hard reading, and I stuck with it, and I wasn't sure why. But by the spring, Abdul Ali asked me to get involved with the charge. They worked with Police Free Penn and other scholars from UPenn that were in the anthropology department with the research that they had. And then sort of, and I can't speak well to it, but hopefully Abdul Ali is given more venues in which to speak about this. But research came together, and their inquiry blew up this collection. As these emails were being circulated about what in fact was being held, what was where, Police Free Penn and Abdul Ali scheduled a rally to be held right across the street from where the Morton Collection is held. And I was asked to come and share in ritual and to hold some ceremony. And what was also interesting was at the city archives, I was looking at maps of the city and the UPenn campus, and all of the land that Penn purchased or took over in order to build that campus. And that day with Police Free Penn, I did a ceremony where I brought this sculptural piece that you may have seen, this pick, and I brought this box that I had made that I was using sort of to carry some of my grief about what I had been reading, what I had been finding in the archive, my mother's passing. And I packed up this pick, which this piece is called Return the Crania. I packed this piece in this box with water and coconut oil and brought it to the campus, and as a part of the action, proceeded to read a piece that was sort of my understanding of what needed to be done there. And I won't read it today, but it should be being published in the next couple of months in a sort of zine recap of this time. And as you see on the ground, this shape in the circle and sort of the braids next to it was a part of what I was conjuring with the pick, was to reanimate the skulls, bring the hair back, the flesh back, to these crania of these stolen people who were dug up from graves at the Blockley Alms House, and who were transported all the way from Cuba. And I asked that these ancestors reanimate themselves and walk with us that day to the president's house to demand justice. And I asked that, all involved be kept safe, and for whatever truths that needed to emerge to come forward, come to light. And the next day, we found out about the remains of the children of Move that were also being held in that collection. And so I mentioned that today, and I brought this piece because this piece was made in the desert. I made it in California, probably in March, just after my mom passed. I went to the desert for a while, and my hands, began working with this piece. And my wife sort of looked at it and was like, you need to finish it. It's not finished. And I, kept with it, and I actually took all of the shells off at one point and came back to it and reworked it again. And for the call to happen, I sat reflecting on it the other day with Abdul Ali, and I think that for those of you who are interested in using archival research to make your work, for those of you who are both activists and scholars, for those of you who are both researchers and, social scientists, I just want more of us to lean into the integration of all of these parts of ourselves, all of these intelligences, because if I hadn't sort of respected and valued my practice, I wouldn't have known to say yes. I wouldn't have followed the call to complete this book. I wouldn't have been able to come. I wouldn't have participated in such a powerful action and brought spirit to it and brought ceremony to it. And I presented a few months ago with an artist from Liz, what's Liz's last name? Liz Kennedy, from Allied Media Conference. She's an organizer and administrator of that project, but also she works with Led to Life, which is another organization that really centers ceremony as it relates to healing trauma, correcting history. And I think that, organizations such as Led to Life, myself, Abdul Ali, so many of our friends, as I mentioned, Andrea, as I mentioned, those ancestors, Gary and Davine and Mama Denise, for those of us that integrate, the calling is different. But if we're unsure of ourselves, and if we don't spend time affirming our practices, affirming our recipes, knowing that we're the first and most important site of research, and we are accurate first sources, we stand to maybe not make impacts that we can make, both in this plane and in others. And I'll stop there and just thank you all for having me. Thank you, Leah, for supporting me and getting this together. Thank you to Another co-creator, Julie Rainbow, who, powered me up. Thank you to my family and to the fellows in chronicling resistance. And, I'm really grateful to be here, and I'm looking forward to, sharing more as this work emerges.
Thank you so much, Charlyn. That was such a beautiful presentation. You were so generous in sharing the really personal aspects of your work. And I think you gave, some of the emerging artists who are in the audience some solid advice on how to proceed with this type of work, as well as some excellent resources. So I'm personally really looking forward to engaging with some of those recommendations myself. So I think now, we can definitely open the floor up to questions. If you're visiting us on Zoom, you can put your questions into the Q&A box, and I will field them to Charlyn for you. If you're in person here, I can pass you the microphone. There are definitely some folks in the wings here, so don't be shy. But we do have a question actually already up. Lucille says, thank you so much for sharing with all of us today. Can you describe best practices you employ when collaborating with other creatives?
That's a really good question. Honestly, for probably 10 years straight, all of my work was collaborative. And I got burnt out. And so I think a best practice that I would share today is take breaks. Take breaks. Take breaks from the people that you're collaborating with. Take breaks from collaborating altogether. Because oftentimes for me, especially as I'm, people are in varying places of their lives and sort of relating to family as well and community. So, in order to have like the patience and bandwidth to be a good community member or parent, I needed to have some space that was just mine. I needed to be able to have some creative space where I didn't have to ask anyone's permission to do things a certain way, or ask what they thought. I could go with my first instinct on things. And that's what I've been doing to an extent. I think I'm definitely in collaboration with the fellowship. And there is collaboration among, yourself and librarians when you're researching. So that's been plenty. I think one of the really fun things that I'm looking forward to doing more of right now, to be honest, is collaborating with my wife. She's a musician and creates soundscapes. And so we recently, and it should be coming out soon, recorded and riffed off of a piece that I just had published in a book that just came out about the uprisings here in Philadelphia. It's called How We Stay Free, Notes on a Black Uprising. And that's edited by Chris Rogers and Fajr Muhammad and the Paul Robeson House. And we took the piece that I put in there and kind of chopped and screwed it into a prayer, into a tool for ceremony. And so I'm really looking forward to working with her more, just because we do so much, day-to-day stuff. Day-to-day stuff and making art together is really lovely and therapeutic. And thank you for that question, Lucille. Oh, that actually, there's one more best practice that I've really been thinking about, because I do want to collaborate more. Actually, one of my god brothers, Anya Love, has been working on this play. He's the creator of the Coltrane Symposium. And he and I have been pairing up every few weeks to do kind of listening sessions. and riff sessions. And that has been really dope. And I think that what it reminded me of, and also, speaking about my wife, was like, I want to work more with the people that are already close to me. I want like deeper investment with the people that I already know, with whom there's trust. Because then, balancing the asking permission or taking liberties is, among sort of relational, it's a relational thing versus a transactional thing. And there's love there. So
I'm going to turn to our in-person people. Does anyone? Yeah.
Hi, Charlyn. Thank you for the presentation. It was very soulful. And one of the questions, one of the comments that you made was about trust your own history intuitively. How do you, or even some best practices, because particularly when we're taught to not know our own truths, how do you continually honor your more intuitive ways of being in the world and trusting that? And the second part of my question is about history as character. So oftentimes alternative narratives are left out of the history. And what experiences have you had with delving into archives when that alternative narrative is missing, and encouraging them to include a broader story about history?
yeah, thank you for that. The first question is such a good one. And I think everyone needs to create their own best practices. For me, mine are definitely prayer. That's one of the reasons why my mom is, kind of she's the pinnacle, center, apex, like positionality, foundation. She's everywhere. She's everywhere in my practice because she taught me to pray. She taught me to pray in a pious Christian way, but she taught me also to pray through her movements and the way that she made use of her time. Her service to others, to the community, was largely how I learned to pray. So my prayer and then quality time with others is essential for me. When I'm doing those things and I'm in the archive, and this kind of bridges into the second question about intuition. When I'm really full, and in my practices, when I close my eyes or and tune in as I'm reading work, or reviewing the archival content, or even just sitting with the frustration of not finding something, it's in those moments that I can, and this is why I say collaboration is not always ideal. And I hope this sound from the studio next door is not messing with our sound too much. But yeah, when you're really tapped in, you can close your eyes, you can start to write, and you'll write that alternate history. You'll fill in a gap. And being able to trust that, I think is so essential. And I hope that anyone listening today, I hope that from you all, it resonates more and more and more out that we really, really deserve to own voices that are not just in service of capitalism and like other people's agendas, like really honing in on the spiritual connection that we have with this research and bringing out those stories, whether it's a poem, a photo, you know, a collage, a breath, a movement, you know, like, I don't know, there's endless ways that we can bring forward that transmission, you know. And I know that for sure, that we deserve to be using our spiritual connection with the past and the future to offer something special now. There's over 8 billion people on the planet. There's audience for it. You know, there's no way that one person or one book or one place can really get all the stories right for all the people. So we need your story. We need you to figure out what the thing is that grounds you, that helps you be expansive, and then that helps you transmit those stories and speak for those who want to speak through you.
I think this relates to the question that Julie just asked, but I'm wondering if the work that you do, if you've been thinking about how to be a good future ancestor, and I wonder if that has something to do with like the documentation that you are generating. I don't know, I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I'm really proud about the way that I be here. You know, like I'm considerate of all of the things that we want to change. And I mean, I have children, so having children sort of ensures that you know that someone will think of you when you're gone. You know, like somebody will. If my work never reaches anyone else, the impacts have been made on them. So I think about them because my mom is such a potent ancestor, and she had Alzheimer's dementia for about, 13 years before she passed. And so I called her my living ancestor. And so there's all these different things that can make us have to communicate spiritually with others, telepathically with others. That isn't just about like the death of our body. It's also about like how we're able to access our various faculties, you know? And so, yeah, I mean, I'm really grateful for the way that I'm showing up, because I know and I get to see it take root in my kids, in my homies, you know, from one project to the next, like being even more clear about the way that we need our support to be kind of bolstered from institutions. You know, I think that the impacts that we're making on institutions right now are going to live on, you know, and I think that that's a really significant way to leave a mark with your work. You know, and then I don't know, like then there's just like things, there's objects that you can leave behind. And some of my work is about that. I might realize in 10 years that it was never actually about the objects. An artist that I worked on a project with the Philadelphia Museum of Art in 2017 with so many friends and homies, my wife included, Mama Denise was included in that, Muti Reed, Siobhan Love, Londin, who else was there? Suleha Olatunji, Femi Olatunji, like all of these people that are like directly, you know, in community with us. What we did left such an incredible and staggering impact on like perhaps the institution, but on everyone that beheld, that was witness to that I think that like we can absolutely be great ancestors now. And, you know, on the sort of psychic, spiritual level, I think what, you know, Julie's question about like, how do you sort of take care of oneself, in taking care of yourself and building that connection and building up that ability to communicate in these other ways, strengthening these transmissions. You know, I do think that that's a way that you be a potent ancestor later. You know, I think you just have to dream about it. You know, I think you just have to want it.
That is a really beautiful place to end this talk.
Thank you so much for having me, Leah.
It's our pleasure. It really is, it's been an honor. And I think a lot of us are leaving feeling really inspired today. So thank you for your generosity.
Thank you.
And yeah, thanks to everybody who signed on online and those that were listening to in the wings here. It means a lot to all of us. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks
so much.
Go follow Chronicling Resistance on Instagram as well. Also today, there's a food distribution going on my block in Southwest Philly on 51st and Regent. If you want to follow the free brunch program on Instagram, you can find out more information about that. Completely free produce. You can go and, you know, grab up for yourself and your neighbors. And then Sunday, we're having a free event at Golden Dragon Takeout in West Philly called Bacon Saltfish, which is a part of my fellowship work. So thanks to Chronicling Resistance for that, Pew Mellon, but then also is it's completely free. So it's supported by the Bunny Hop Philadelphia. And so, yeah, that dope networking is happening. But follow all the projects.
Wow, lots of opportunities to see you again and engage.
Talk
Great.
to you soon.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Bye.